Hello, and welcome to What on Earth, the podcast of the Environmental Investigation Agency, or EIA. This year, the organisation is marking 40 years at the forefront of investigating and campaigning against environmental crime and abuse. From the early days as pioneers of working undercover, we've come a long way in 4 decades. And as part of our celebrations, this podcast will be talking with some of the longest serving campaigners in EIA about the work they've done and the changes they've seen over the years. I'm Paul Newman, EIA Senior Press and Communications Officer, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Campaigns Director Julian Newman. Julian, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Paul, and for the record I should state that as well as my colleague, you're also my brother.
Indeed, I was going to try and cover that up, but I thought, well, we've got the same voice, so why bother? Okay, start us off. Can you tell us a bit about your background before you found your way to EIA?
Well, how far back do you want to go? I mean, I grew up in a place called Caister-on-Sea, a village in deepest Norfolk by the sea, as the name suggests. Had a wonderful childhood, lots of natural air and swimming in the sea, very good. And every day I walked to school, I used to go through the graveyard, and there was a monument in the graveyard to some lifeboatmen who had perished in 1906 or 1906, 1907, something like that. And the story goes that they went out to try and rescue a boat in distress, and they were unable to do so, and the boat overturned, and they all perished. Apparently on the beach there were some onlookers, and one person turned to the other and said, "Why didn't they turn back?" And the other person replied, "Caister men never turn back." And I think that's a pretty good motto, and I tried to live up to that during my life. After I left Caister, I moved on to go to Polytechnic, studied geography at Portsmouth Polytechnic. I had a good 3 years there learning about these far-flung distant places. And of course, when I graduated, I did what most geography students do. Couldn't get a job, so I went backpacking and worked my way around the world, including cleaning windows in Australia, picking fruit in New Zealand, and all manner of jobs too. It was a great trip. I was away over a year, and it really taught me a lot about the world. And when I came back, I thought I'd better get a bit more serious about life. So I did a course in journalism, and that launched a career as a journalist, which I had for about 5 or 6 years. Involved working for a news agency in Brussels, reporting on EU business news. And then I moved back to London and worked for a Sunday newspaper, a national newspaper. For a couple of years, it taught me some interesting skills. And then one day, I was looking through The Guardian, because even though the paper I worked for was quite right-wing, I used to read The Guardian. There was a small ad, very small ad in The Guardian, and it said, "Wanted, investigator, must like travel and have a background in journalism." And it was Environmental Investigation Agency, which I'd heard of once before because we'd done a story on the newspaper I worked with about a survey EIA had done into availability of endangered species in Chinatown in London. So I knew the name a bit. So I fired off a CV and got an interview. I was interviewed by the 3 founders. It's quite daunting. And they gave me the job. And I've been here ever since. That was getting on for 27 years ago.
Fantastic stuff.
Time flies when you're fun.
What kind of skills were they particularly looking for when they talked to you? Obviously, the background in journalism would have helped, and the travel experience must have indicated that you were quite happy living out of a backpack. But what else are they looking for?
Yeah, that came in useful. Obviously, I mean, I hadn't worked in the NGO sector before, but I think I really wanted to make use of my journalism skills for a purpose rather than just writing a story that would become instant history. I think I managed to convey that in the interview, that I really wanted a career that had some resonance, some output, some changes that you could actually see in the actual world. So the journalism or the writing would actually then be followed up with actions, meetings, and get things changed.
That would have been sometime in the early 90s, wasn't it? 94,
that was
95?
1997.
97. So what was the organisation actually like when you joined it at that time? What sort of size and how was it operating?
It was quite a lot smaller than it is now. Quite a few staff, the campaigns room were quite young. I think quite a few had come as volunteers. So it was, it wasn't as big as EA has become now. But people were very dedicated, used to work really long hours, which I was really impressed by. And everyone in those days would sort of pitch in, because we didn't have that many staff. So if there was a report launch, or everyone would just down tools and help each other out. So I was instantly kind of impressed by the camaraderie and the can-do spirit, and the fact that people used to work really hard and really believed in what they were doing, and that shone through, rather than being sort of like cynical journalists that I worked with in the past.
Yeah, I've been in journalism myself, as you know, and that seems to be one of the kind of standard operating kind of guidelines you get given is learn cynicism quickly. What was it like going into the field for the first time? Obviously, it must be quite different going into the field as an environmental crime investigator as opposed to a journalist asking questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd done a little bit of surveillance and stuff when I was on the Express and done research skills, but I hadn't really had to pose in person on an undercover basis before, although I'd sort of remotely done a bit of it. And, I didn't really have much time to think about it, really. When I joined in sort of June 1997, within 6 weeks, I was in Barcelona in Spain, pretending to be a trader of chemicals looking to buy some chlorofluorocarbons, which were ozone damaging chemicals that were being traded illegally into Europe, with Spain being one of the main hubs. So in essence, I'd spent a couple of weeks doing a setting up a dummy company, which I mean, in those days was pretty basic, because this is really before the internet was used widely. So I set up this company called Transcool Trading, created some false letterhead and a false address, and then combed through research sources for companies that looked like they were not behaving appropriately when it came to the CFC trade. And I just faxed out these solicitations. And then, within days, started getting answers from China, from Spain. And at that time, we felt that China would be a bit daunting to take on. So, I was asked to go to Spain and meet with some of the companies. So I found myself, in an industrial estate on the outskirts of Barcelona, carrying a hidden camera, which I'd not had much time to practice on, walking into a room with 3 people and trying to keep on top of that and trying to get some useful information. I left there with a migraine, but a big sense of achievement, and the fact that I was, that gave me the courage to know that I could do more of this. But it was quite a tricky one to start off with, but I pulled it off, and that was the beginning of it, really.
How did you find the technology at the time? Because obviously a lot of the undercover equipment we use now is very discreet, for want of a better word, and much easier to work with. But in those days, I think you were wrangling gigantic VHS cameras, were you not?
Technology has changed amazingly in the time I've been at EIA. It's really, really fundamentally a different world. When I joined, mobile phones were not really used widely. We had one terminal in the whole of the office for the internet, which you had to share. And our equipment was, shall we say, a little bit challenging at times. I mean, when I went on that first trip to Spain, the hidden camera bag was literally a camera in a bag. And it had, it looked like a camera bag. It had a hidden camera inside it, concealed camera. And it ran off about 16 AA batteries to power the lens and the microphone. So it would get as hot as Jupiter.
And what was the running time of
and
that?
You had 40 minutes if you're lucky, but we used to base it around 30 minutes. So a lot of my investigations, I had to pretend that I had a weak bladder to keep making excuses to go to the bathroom.
Just to switch out all the batteries.
But it did the job. I mean, it did the job. It wasn't great, but it was of its time. And then within a few years, technology moved on sufficiently that we could have much more. The devices we have today I won't talk about them, but they are amazing compared with the ones we had in the past. Indeed. In terms of how to use them and the safety they give for us. So yeah,
I know it's like almost 30 years ago now. Loath as I am to bring that up for either of us, but what were your emotions at the time? What were you feeling inside yourself as you were sat there pretending to be somebody else with this gigantic sports bag with a camera in it that you were trying to conceal? And
just focus, mostly on the story. I mean, if you went in there, you set it up the best you could, and if it didn't work, then you couldn't change it at that situation. Of course, you were watching your watch a lot, looking at your watch, because you had to get out of the room sometimes and change batteries, which wasn't without its challenges. I remember once, a couple of years later, my first investigation being in Beijing, in an ivory carving factory, where we were talking about supplies of ivory with some dodgy dealers, and the camera battery was getting low. So I made my excuses about having a dodgy stomach because of Chinese food, and went into the bathroom. And in those days in China, the bathrooms were like stalls. I mean, I'm 6'5", and I was looming out of the stall, so I had to crouch down, try and change the battery, and at the same time someone came in the next door stall, and I'd start making what you might call toilet noises. And it was a guy I'd been meeting, and thankfully he left, and I came out and made an excuse about his stomach, and then off we went for our meeting again. So you have to think on your feet, but I think the key thing was to really remain focused on your story, be alert to any threats, always have a get out plan, even though we're in pretty remote places at the time. But also, just purely focusing on the story and trying to be attentive for any dangers.
So I know you've worn a lot of hats, different hats in your time at EIA under various campaigns. What are your most vivid memories of working for the organisation over the years?
Wow, there's obviously a huge range. It's probably the most happy memories of the people. I've worked with incredible people over the years. They're really dedicated, pleasure to work with. I mean, sometimes you get to know these people really well and spend weeks on the road with them. And there's never been any prima donnas. Everyone's always been great to work with. And I think that's the strongest memory, is just the sheer camaraderie that I've had with people working in the EIA, and that's across the organisation, not just the campaigners or the investigators, but everyone from the finance team to the press team, everyone. I think that's the EIA's greatest strength, I think, is its people.
And what about...
And some of the other members are kind of, a lot to mention, especially the field trips, getting to see parts of the world that are really off the beaten map. Because one part of EIA's raison d'etre is to bear witness. We don't just sit in the office writing about things that we hear about. We actually go and look, and that's still our ethos, even though technology has changed. So if you want to go and document illegal logging, we don't just do it by looking on the internet. We go into the forest and document it. And so through that, I've had some amazing experiences. Seen some amazing wildlife. We've been out in Tanzania, seen elephants. Once I was in a small hut in a national park in Tanzania when we were doing an investigation into ivory poaching, and there was a huge furore outside the hut, and it turned out that the hippo had come out of the water and died, and lions and hyenas had been fighting over it all night. And I couldn't get out of the cabin until they came and rescued me, really, because these lions were really going at it. Thankfully, they had a lot of hippo to eat rather than me.
That's quite a change of scenery from Caister.
Yeah.
And I recall you telling me a story as well about when you were doing an illegal logging investigation, that the sheer physical effort it took to actually get to the location, from planes and boats and canoes and hiking through swamps, and it just sounded such a grueling effort to even get there, let alone to begin then documenting when you do.
Yeah, in the early days of our major investigations that we were doing was in Indonesia. That was a focus for our illegal logging campaign in the late 90s. And we focused on one particular type of wood, which was being heavily illegally logged, called ramin wood. Unfortunately, ramin wood was a swamp species. So to get the evidence and to understand how it was being logged, we had to basically wade through the swamp. And I think my colleague I was working with at the time, from our partner NGO called Telepac, he brought a GPS with him. And after we got about deep into the bush, it turned out it wasn't really used to working it. So we used to have to guide ourselves by the sound of chainsaws to try and navigate ourselves around the swamp. And we managed to find our way back to the boat, and that was it. Yeah, so it was quite a memory.
Which is like, that's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? I guess you hear the sound of chainsaws in a pristine national forest. Your instinct would be to go the other way. Obviously, in your case, you actually wanted to get to where they were.
Yeah, I mean, Indonesia was an incredible experience. In terms of EIA's work on illegal logging, it was a huge campaign that grew from quite humble origins, and started off in 1999, really. And that was just after the fall of the dictator Suharto. So previously, Suharto and his cronies had divvied up the forest, and there was massive illegal logging. There were these huge forest fires in '98, which hastened the demise of Suharto. So when I got in the country in mid-1999, there was an air of electricity in the place, reformation, lots of student protests, and it just seemed like a really exciting time to be there. And over the next few years, we travelled far and wide across Indonesia because as the economy collapsed somewhat and all the kind of uncertainty, a lot of local kind of robber barons had sprung up and were sort of directing illegal logging operations. So we went to Kalimantan, we went to Sumatra, we went to Sulawesi, basically all over the country. And part of what we were doing was gathering intelligence and information to expose what was going on, but we also had a project to help support local NGOs, because obviously civil society was growing at that time in Indonesia. So we had a program where we used to go to quite remote areas and give cameras to the local NGOs and give them some training how to use the cameras, and off they go, creating loads of mini EIAs across the country. We did this with our wonderful partner organisation, Telepac. Telepac were just great to work with. We still work with them today, and we've faced many challenges, and we stood shoulder to shoulder with Telepac. And that network we built, is still in place. Many of those people are still involved in the NGO movement, and we just produced report after report, and we got lots of change came out of that.
And you think obviously working with local organisations, but particularly in this case Telepac, is one of the reasons we've been so successful on the ground.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we are people who come and go. We go back at the end of our investigation. We might have to be there a month or so. I've been on trips for 2 months at one time, but ultimately we go back. Whereas the local groups, that's where they live. And so we're always very careful to make sure that their security was okay. I appreciate the fact that they deal with this every day of their lives. We go in and we come out again.
Excellent. Over the years, obviously, as well as many memories, you've also been involved in a lot of pieces of work that have turned into quite significant successes for, well, both us and the environment. Well, what do you think have been the biggest successes in which you managed to play a part?
Wow, we had quite a number over the years at EIA. We keep rushing them up. I think a couple spring to mind. I mean, the first one would be, following up on what I was just talking about in Indonesia, would be the one we call the Last Frontier. And by about 2003, 2004, we had some good success with some areas in Indonesia, and the international market as well was becoming more sensitive to Indonesian timber. But the damage was still quite clear to see, especially in national parks. But we thought we started getting information from sources on the ground that a lot of the logging had moved across to Papua province, right in the east of Indonesia. It's a very remote place, and so we did what we do. We heard these rumours and we went and checked them out. And myself and a couple of colleagues from Telepac, we went to the town of Sorong, which was a port town where we were told a lot of timber was passing through. And we kept a relatively low profile, but we tried to meet some local contacts and local NGOs, and the word got out on the grapevine that we were in town, and we got approached one night. There was a knock at our door, and it was these two chaps from a community called the Kunasaimos, who lived about several hours outside of Sorong, and they came to us with a story and a map. A lot of good stories begin with a map, and they're basically drawn where their lands were and highlighted where the lands were being illegally logged by an operation controlled by a military officer. So we digested information, and then we went home, and we started thinking what we could do about that. And so we started looking at the type of timber that was being logged. It was a species called merbau. We found out merbau was quite a darkish brown wood and was heavily in demand for flooring, particularly in China. So that was where a lot of it was going to. And we started coming up with a plan as to what we could do. So we went back to Sorong, and we met our friends from the Kunasaimos, and they had invited us to go and film in their community to sort of show how their traditional lives are being impacted by the illegal logging. And they told us it'd be like a 1 hour boat ride and about 3 hour walk. Well, because we missed the tide, it turned out to be a 5 hour boat trip and a 6 hour walk through the jungle at night, which is unbelievable. I mean, walking through a almost pristine tropical jungle in the early hours of the morning was just an amazing experience I'll never forget. And when we got to the village, the people couldn't have been friendlier. They all came out to see us. We spent a lovely couple of days filming their traditional handicrafts and livelihoods, and unfortunately also filming logs that have been cut just outside their territory. And we did an interview with the head of the group, a guy called Frederick, and he was just inspirational. One of the best interviews I've ever done. He just spoke so fluently and so passionately about the importance of forest to his people. So we left the area, and then we thought, well, the only really viable thing we can do is look at this trade and try and stamp out, the demand or how it's being trafficked. So we set out to do that, and carried out investigations in Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, into this merbau trade, and we managed to get some amazing information. We spent like 4 days with a timber broker in Shanghai who opened lots of doors for us, thinking that we were going to be his golden egg. We were going to make him rich by buying lots of flooring. And we came across a port called Zhangjiagang Port, which is the biggest port in the world for tropical timber. And we managed to get entry into that by using the timber businessman who sort of vouched for us. And we were able to walk in there and film openly, which was quite amazing. It was a shocking sight. I mean, it was like a huge forest had been knocked on its side. The scale of the operation was huge. So we got all these findings together. Then we did a report and a film, and we launched it at a press conference in Jakarta. And we timed it deliberately because it was just when the government had changed and a guy called Yudhoyono had come to power. And we thought, the first 100 days are always a time to try and set a model. So we gave him something to do. So we released this report and called for immediate action. And it was an amazing response. We were on the media every night in Indonesia. Yudhoyono called in all his cabinet with the cameras there to help sort it out. And the forest minister and other ministers, they came together and they sent a team of enforcement agents to the area of Papua New Sorong that was being logged, and overnight stopped the logging. A lot of the loggers fled, and it wasn't not perfect, but it was a huge outcome for us, really, in a way. And the most nice thing about it all is that when it all died down a couple of days later, I got a phone call on my mobile from a guy called Simpson, who was one of the first people we'd met in the hotel all those years ago. And he said that the military officer had fled and the logging had stopped on his land. So I think that's a great outcome. Of course, Indonesia, it's not without its problems, but Indonesia has reformed its forestry sector quite a lot. There are still issues, but there's been progress. And also, there's been rules put in place in Europe and other countries to restrict the import of illegal timber. And a lot of this came from our work in Indonesia. So that's a great success, I think. And we're still doing it. We're still working on illegal logging cases. We're still working with Talapak. And we sometimes hear from our friends in Kunasaimos, which is great. In fact, Talapak went out there recently and trained some of the youth of Kunasaimos in how to do forest monitoring. So that relationship is still going on.
Oh, that's fantastic. We've almost got the extended family of EIA out there and the next generation coming online.
Yeah, so that was great, and obviously it's all teamwork, but it was a good project with a very tangible outcome. And I think another one I'd like to mention is what we call the Shredong connection. This was the exposing of a major, huge ivory trafficking network that we did a few years ago, I think 2017, 2018. I wasn't so involved in the investigation this time because it was my excellent colleagues who just did an astounding job. But we managed to, by chance, we had sent this team of investigators, we'd gone up to northern Mozambique because we've been working in neighbouring Tanzania, where Tanzania had appalling ivory poaching levels. I think it was about 10,000 elephants a year at that time. But we'd done a report in 2013 and it exposed some of the main operators and some of the main syndicates at play in Tanzania. And there was something of a clampdown. So we started hearing things that, there have been quite some heavy jail sentences handed down and things were getting better. But we did also hear that some of the poaching had switched to neighbouring Mozambique, to a place called in northern Mozambique. And so the team went on the ground in a town called Pemba, a port town. And by chance, the hotel where they were staying, there was another group. There was a group of Chinese people who would kind of just leave in the morning, come back late at night, quite circumspect about what they were doing. And our team started chatting with them, and started getting on well with them, socialising with them. And, they said at first they were kind of trading aluminium doors and floors, which seemed like a pretty strange story. And they were there to buy seafood as well. Yeah. So, after a few days of sort of hanging out a bit, they left, and our guys were convinced that they were there on ivory business because they alluded a lot to the business. They sort of claimed they weren't doing it, but they knew a lot about it. They said that people from their hometown ran the business, were running it for years, and so we continued engagement with them. Even after they left, our team kept in touch with them, and we kept them on the lead for like 6 months or so, and built some incredible insights into this ivory trafficking syndicate. Our team went out and met with them a couple of times in their hometown of Shredong, where they're much more relaxed. And he said straight away, we're ivory smugglers, second generation, doing it for ages. And our town is the biggest entry point for ivory tusks into China, and about 80% of the tusks that were being smuggled into China were coming through at that town called Shredong. So we had a great story. Lots of talk, lots of insights on how the ivory trade worked, amazing level of detail, and our undercover team just played a blinder. To be able to pull this off was just remarkable. But we still didn't have the hard evidence. They could have just been talking until we managed to get to a position where we got invited to view some of the ivory that they trafficked when they were in Mozambique I think they trafficked about 2.3 tons in total when we'd met them out there. And they invited our undercover team to go to their town, Shuidong, and view some of the ivory with a view to buying it. Of course, this was incredibly risky and incredibly tense, but we felt we didn't really have an alternative because this group was extremely active and we needed to do our best to shut it down. And we couldn't, if we had just released our findings from conversations with them, people could say, they're just shooting the breeze. And, how do you know it's real? So, under the cover of darkness, our team were invited to go to this house in Shuidong, a remote place. It was quite nerve-wracking because I was a sort of check-in person with them on that moment. And again, they pulled it off amazingly. They got in there, managed to get footage of the ivory, and managed to get out again without having to buy it. So then we knew that they were for real, and we knew we had a huge potential story on our hands. But we also had a very active syndicate that was just recycling the profits to kill more elephants, sell more, kill more. And so we put together a dossier of information and we gave it to various authorities, including the Chinese embassy in London. And we didn't hear anything for a while, for a month or so. And we felt, we know these guys are still plotting to do more. So we felt, all we can do if we're not hearing back from the authorities is get their names out there. Nobody likes their picture in the paper. So we released a report called the Shuidong Connection, and it got big pickup in the media. And we did a film as well, which showed all the undercover footage. So it was a really, really impressive piece of work. And a couple of days later, I got a phone call on my mobile. It was from a number in China I didn't recognise, and the voice came on the phone and said, "I'm speaking from China Customs. We'd like to talk to you, please." So I got to the office, and then we had quite intensive discussions over 3 or 4 days. They would send a bunch of questions every morning, and I'd respond the best I could. And then they invited me to go out there and give them a briefing. And what happened is, I came out there and I was greeted by a room full of about 15, 16 Chinese customs officers, and they were in the midst of carrying out a raid on the town of Shuidong. So they had questions about certain individuals and certain methodologies and certain timings that I did my best to answer. And it was quite an amazing couple of days, really, because to be in the midst of a live operation like that and being able to provide information was quite unprecedented in a way. And they ultimately, the crackdown resulted in the 3 people that were identified in Pemba in Mozambique. They got captured. One guy was called Wang. He was caught in Shuidong. Another guy called Shi. He had fled to Tanzania and he was repatriated. He got 6 years. Wang got 15 years. And the last one was called U, and he was found in Nigeria, and he was also extradited and in prison. And it turns out what happened is that we'd sent their information off, and China Customs had received it via the embassy. But what they were doing, they were waiting for the syndicate to bring in another container so they could catch them in flagrante delicto, in the act. But obviously our report forced their hand, because obviously it was getting out there in the media. So they went, quite a large team went in and raided Shuidong, certain premises. They discovered the ivory stockpile, they discovered paperwork, and they discovered enough to really make a case that stuck. And it was an amazing outcome. And although of course ivory trafficking remains a problem, at least we were able to stop the activities of one of the most notorious and active ivory syndicates operating that we've ever come across.
Yeah, it's almost the way you tell it. It's almost like the analogy of butterfly wings having unforeseen impacts when you think it started with a chance encounter on another investigation in a hotel, and it winds up with one of the biggest ivory trafficking syndicates in China being taken down. That's quite something. You've been with us now for coming up on 30 years, and obviously we've changed a fair bit. You mentioned earlier about the technology and the internet, particularly. What changes have you seen in the actual way that environmental crime itself is done over the years, and how have we adapted to meet that?
Well, it's always mutating. I think when I started working at EIA, there wasn't even a phrase called environmental crime. People just thought you were talking about people who were fly tipping. So, through our work, we were one of the first NGOs to actually make a case for action against environmental crime. We did a report called Our Planet, Our Problem a long time ago that made the case for treating these crimes as serious crimes, not just minor little crimes that don't affect anyone. There was this feeling that somehow they were victimless crimes, because it's only an elephant being killed or a tree being cut down, but we're all victims of these crimes because it's our beautiful planet that's being despoiled by these crimes. So we were one of the first groups to sort of make a case for environmental crime internationally and nationally to be treated as serious organised crime. And that's got some traction. There's still a way to go. I mean, we still find some frustrations, but I mean, it's now been increasingly recognised. People like Interpol and the World Customs Organization have done these reports showing the scale of environmental crime, billions and billions of dollars to show how much is being accumulated by these criminals at the cost of our planet. So I think that's been quite successful, and we've seen some good policy changes as well. We worked to get in place the EU timber regulation, which makes it an offence to import illegally logged timber. We've been responsible for a raft of decisions at the CITES meeting, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. So we've had a lot of success in putting in place more forward-thinking policies, and we've had some success in getting those policies enforced. But there's still a gap between the policies and the rules that we've been able to get put in place to prevent environmental crime and the enforcement response. That's slowly changing, but we need to do more on that, and that's obviously a big challenge for us in the years ahead to keep momentum going against the environmental crimes.
Excellent. And there's something you touched on earlier in terms of the way AI operates and how effective that makes us. But I appreciate it's impossible to boil these things down to a single point. But what do you think, if there is one, has been the secret of AI success over the years?
Well, that's a tricky one. I mean, I think there's so many really. I mean, I think the key thing has been that our ethos is to go out and bear witness to these things. I mean, of course, that's changed somewhat with technology, and you can now do investigations remotely and online. But we still like to get on the ground and show pictures and images about what's happening. And that will always be part of our raison d'etre, to actually go to these places and not to rely on rumours and investigate and document what's going on and bring that out to the wider world and use that information to create change. Also, I think we're not afraid to name names. A lot of investigations expose individuals who are very, very deeply involved in various environmental crimes. And we are always very, very sure to check our information and to make sure that we are not making fake accusations. But we believe in exposing those who are doing these crimes, especially when they're recidivists and have been doing them a long time. Obviously we carefully check our reports for any potential libel issues. But I've been around quite a long time now. We've never been successfully sued, so it means we get something right. Our information is watertight, and that's another thing that's is raison d'etre, is to get really strong evidence, not just rumours. That's why we went all that way into Sredong to see the ivory, because otherwise it was just words. So that's also what we do is a great part of our work. So bearing witness, bringing home stories, not being afraid to name names. These are things that are intrinsic to EIA, I would say. And we were the first group to start doing this. Now, of course, there's quite a few groups in the world now with similar modus operandi. There's enough space for all of them. There's a big challenge of environmental crime, but I can say that we were the ones that pioneered this type of working.
I guess it's one of those things where imitation is definitely the sincerest form of flattery in this case. One final question before I let you go back to your avalanche of work. What challenges do you see ahead for the organisation as we are now moving into our fifth decade?
Well, I think our spirit is still very strong. We still have a lot of institutional knowledge, but of course, we've been growing quite a bit recently, so we have to make sure we manage that growth very carefully. It's a good problem to have, because it's best to fix the roof while the sun is shining rather than when it's raining. But we are working on that really well as a team, and we've got some wonderful new campaigns who have joined us, and we're expanding our work as well into new areas. For example, our climate campaign used to focus quite a lot on fluorinated gases, these chemicals called HFCs that affect the climate, and now we're expanding out to work on methane. So the work is there to be done. We are facing, without overstating it, a crisis on our planet. Our natural systems are being despoiled every day and ruined and wrecked, and so the work is there to be done. And now we have to manage our sort of growth carefully, but the work has to be done, and we're the best ones placed to do many of these tasks.
Well, I guess the ultimate ambition is to put ourselves out of a job. Unfortunately, that's still a way off, but baby steps will get us there.
I think another kind of concern is the growing authoritarianism in some countries and the populism. Some of the places we work in, getting harder to work in, to be frank, and especially we feel a lot of local NGOs are under pressure in countries, so we have to sort of try and support them where we can, because there's all sorts of techniques being used for intimidation to sort of fake raids on tax basis, that sort of thing. So authoritarianism and populism are challenges that are quite massive in terms of what we're trying to do to protect the environment.
Well, yeah, I guess there was a time way back when we'd have been, say, if we were caught in somewhere like China doing an investigation, we'd have probably been seen more as a nuisance. But now you've got to worry about being accused of espionage or something far more serious.
Yeah, and it's in a number of countries now. They're all sort of learning the same playbook in a way about repressing NGOs and repressing journalism. But it makes us more dedicated to do the best we can to try and oppose that.
Fantastic work. Well, more power to your arm.
Thank you.
And Julian, a final thing, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. I know you probably chat to me far too often for your own comfort, but it's been nice doing it with something officially related to work.
Great. Thanks so much, bro.
And if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please watch this space for future episodes and check out our website at eia-international.org to find out more about our work. Thanks for joining us, and wherever you are, stay safe out there.